I was 18, bleeding through a borrowed hoodie, and I chose the wrong door, or the only one that could save me. The rain wouldn't stop. It came down in sheets, cold and sharp, soaking through fabric, through skin, straight to bone. My sneakers slapped against the pavement, each step slower than the last, each breath shorter, tighter, like the night itself was closing in. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Not again. The streetlights blurred into long streaks of gold as I ran past them, my vision flickering, my hands shaking so hard I could barely feel my fingers. Somewhere behind me, a car slowed. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I didn't wait to find out. I turned the corner too fast, nearly slipping, catching myself on a metal railing that bit into my palm. Pain flared. Good. It kept me awake. It kept me moving. That's when I saw it. The hotel. Glass doors. Polished brass handles. Warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk like an invitation I didn't deserve. Places like that weren't for people like me. Not with soaked clothes. Not with blood seeping through the sleeve I kept pressed to my side. Not with fear written all over my face. But the rain kept falling, and the street behind me felt darker than it should. I hesitated for half a second. Then I pushed the door open. Heat wrapped around me instantly. Soft. Controlled. Safe-looking. The kind of warmth that made you forget the world outside even existed. My breath hitched. The lobby was too quiet. Marble floors. Low music. People who didn't look up. People who didn't see me. Or chose not to. I took one step forward. Then another. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me anymore. The lights above were too bright now, too clean, exposing everything I was trying to hide. I kept my head down. If I could just reach the elevator. If I could just disappear for a few minutes. That's all I needed. Just a few minutes. Mississippi, the voice stopped me mid-step. Low. Controlled. Not loud, but it didn't need to be. I froze. Slowly I turned. He was standing near the center of the lobby, like he'd always been there. Like the space had been built around him. Tall. Still. Watching. His suit was dark, perfectly fitted, untouched by the chaos. Outside. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, the noise in my head just stopped. Not softer. Not quieter. Gone. Like he had the power to silence everything just by looking at me. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how I must look. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely holding together. I didn't mean to, he didn't answer. Didn't ask who I was. Didn't ask what happened. His gaze dropped briefly to my sleeve, to the place I was trying to hide. Then back to my face. Calculating. Deciding. He turned slightly, not even looking at the man beside him. Bring her upstairs. Just like that. No hesitation. No explanation. My heart slammed against my ribs. Wait, I don't, but the words didn't matter. They never did. Because in that moment, I understood something I wouldn't fully accept until much later. I hadn't just walked into a hotel. I had walked into his world. And people like him didn't open doors. They closed them behind you. The elevator doors closed before I could think of running, the soft chime echoing louder than it should in the tight space as I stood there, dripping rainwater onto polished marble that reflected everything I wanted to hide, my hands still shaking, my breath uneven, my body trying to decide if this was safety or another kind of trap, and neither option felt right, not with him standing just a few feet away, silent, composed, watching me like I was a problem already solved, not a question. Waiting for an answer, his presence filling the air in a way that made it hard to breathe, like the space belonged to him and I was only allowed to exist in it because he had not told me to leave yet, and that realization settled deep in my chest. Heavy and unavoidable, as the elevator began to move upward with a smoothness that made everything feel even more unreal, like I had stepped out of my life and into something I could not control, my reflection in the mirrored wall catching my eye for a second, pale skin, soaked hair clinging to my face, fear I could not hide no matter how hard I tried, and I looked away quickly, because if I kept staring I might break, and I could not afford to break here, not in front of him, not in a place where I had no idea what the rules were, the silence stretching until it almost hurt, until I forced myself to speak just to prove I still could. "I can leave," I said, my voice small but steady enough to carry. "I do not need to stay." And the moment the words left my mouth, I knew they meant nothing, because he did not even look surprised, did not even hesitate, just tilted his head slightly like he had expected that exact sentence, like he had already heard it before in 100 different voices. "You walked in here injured," he said, calm, precise, each word placed carefully. "You are not leaving like that," and there was no anger in his tone, no threat, just certainty, the kind that did not need to raise its voice to be obeyed. And something in me reacted to that, something stubborn and desperate. "You cannot decide that," I said, but even as I spoke the elevator slowed, the doors sliding open to reveal a hallway so quiet it felt like the rest of the world had been cut away. Thick carpet swallowing sound, soft lighting casting everything in gold, and two men already waiting like they had known exactly when we would arrive. Like everything here moved according to his decisions, not chance, not coincidence. And he stepped out first without looking back, not checking if I would follow, just assuming I would, and I hated that he was right, because my feet moved anyway, one step, then another, pulled forward by something I could not name, not trust, but could not ignore either, the hallway stretching ahead like a path I had already chosen. The moment I pushed through those doors downstairs, and when we reached the suite, the door opened before he even touched it, revealing a space that looked too perfect, too controlled. Like nothing bad was allowed to exist inside it, and for a second I just stood there, frozen at the threshold, caught between the storm I had escaped and the unknown waiting in front of me. And he finally turned, his eyes meeting mine again, unreadable but steady inside. He said, not loud, not forceful, just final, and I realized then that whatever had been chasing me outside no longer mattered the same way, because now there was something else I had to understand, something far more dangerous in a different way, a man who did not ask questions, did not wait for answers, and had already decided that I was not leaving. The door closed behind me with a quiet click that sounded louder than it should, sealing off the world I had just come from, and for a moment I just stood there, barely breathing. My fingers still curled into the damp fabric at my side like if I let go everything would fall apart, the room stretching out in front of me in soft gold light and perfect silence, too clean, too controlled, like nothing inside these walls had ever been out of place. And that made me more uneasy, not less, because places like this did not exist without someone making sure they stayed that way, and I could feel him behind me, not touching, not moving, but there, always there, like gravity, impossible to ignore. "Sit," he said, and I did not argue this time. Not because I agreed, but because my legs were already giving out, and I lowered myself onto the edge of the couch, careful, tense, like I was waiting for something to happen, something to go wrong, but nothing did, not immediately, and that silence pressed in harder than any noise could have. My heart beat loud in my ears as I tried to steady my breathing, tried to think, tried to remember what normal felt like, but it was slipping away the longer I stayed here, the longer I stayed near him. He moved then. Finally, crossing the room with slow, deliberate steps, not rushed, never rushed, like time adjusted itself to him instead of the other way around, and he stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head up to meet his eyes, those same eyes that had followed me from the lobby, from the moment I stepped inside, and now there was no distance, no crowd, no distraction, just him and the quiet weight of his attention. "Take your hand away," he said, his voice low but leaving no space for refusal, and instinctively I shook my head, pulling my arm closer, tightening my grip on the sleeve, because that was the only thing I still had control over, even if it was small, even if it was pointless. "I am fine," I said, quickly, too quickly, and I knew he heard it, heard the way my voice didn't match the words, the way the truth slipped through the cracks no matter how hard I tried to hold it together. He did not respond right away, just watched me, steady, patient in a way that made it worse. Like he had all the time in the world to wait me out, and maybe he did, because nothing about him felt rushed, Nothing about him felt uncertain, and that made me feel even smaller sitting there in wet clothes and borrowed courage, until finally he reached forward, not suddenly, not forcefully, just enough to make it clear that this was not a question, and his fingers closed around my wrist, firm but controlled, not hurting, just holding, and I froze, every instinct telling me to pull away, to run, to do something, but I didn't, because something in the way he moved told me that struggling would not change anything. It would only make me more aware of how little control I actually had, and slowly, without breaking eye contact, he lowered my hand, exposing the fabric underneath, darkened, damp, impossible to hide anymore, and for a second neither of us spoke, the silence stretching again, heavier this time, filled with everything I had not said, everything I was still trying to keep buried. And when he finally did speak, his voice was quieter, but no less certain. "You walked in here because you needed help," he said, not asking, not doubting, just stating it like a fact that had already been decided, and my throat tightened. Because I wanted to deny it, wanted to say I had a plan, that I was not desperate, that I had not run out of options, but the words would not come, and maybe he saw that. Maybe he understood more than I wanted him to, because his grip loosened slightly. Not releasing, just enough to shift from control to something else, something I could not quite name. "So let me help," he added, and that was the first time his voice changed, just a fraction, just enough to make everything inside me hesitate. Because I could not tell if that was an offer or a warning, and I was starting to realize it might be both. For a second, I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the way he said it made it sound simple, like help was something clean, something easy, something without a cost, and I knew better than that. I had learned that lesson long before tonight, so I pulled my wrist back the moment his grip loosened, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to reclaim something that felt like mine, even if it was only the illusion of control. "I did not ask for your help," I said, forcing the words out steady even though my chest felt tight, even though my pulse was still racing under my skin, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not anger, not surprise, just a flicker of interest, like I had said something worth noticing, something that set me apart from whatever he was used to. And that realization made me uneasy in a different way, because being noticed by someone like him did not feel safe, it felt permanent. He straightened slightly, his gaze never leaving mine, and the room felt smaller somehow. Like the distance between us meant less the longer we stood there. "You walked into my hotel," he said, his voice calm but edged with something sharper now, something that carried weight without needing volume. "That makes it my concern," and there it was again, that certainty. That quiet authority that did not ask for agreement. It simply existed, and expected the world to adjust around it. I swallowed, trying to hold on to my own ground. Even as it slipped beneath me, "I just needed a place to stay for a few minutes," I said. Softer. This time, more honest than I wanted to be, because pretending felt pointless under his gaze. "I will leave after that." He watched me for a long second, and I could feel it, the way he measured every word, every hesitation. Like he was putting pieces together that I had not meant to reveal, and then he shook his head once, slow, decisive, "No, just that." One word, simple, final, and something in my chest dropped at the sound of it, not because it was loud, but because it was absolute. I pushed myself up from the couch, ignoring the way my legs protested, ignoring the way the room tilted slightly when I moved too fast. "You cannot just decide that," I said again, stronger now, holding on to the last bit of defiance I had left. But he did not move, did not step back, did not make space for me to pass. He just stood there, steady, unshaken, like a wall I had not noticed until I tried to walk through it. "I already did," he replied. And the quiet in his voice made it land harder than if he had raised it, and for a moment, we just stood there, facing each other, the air between us tight, charged with everything neither of us was saying, until a soft knock broke through the silence, controlled, deliberate, and he turned his head slightly, not taking his eyes off me. "Come in," he said, and the door opened almost immediately, a woman stepping inside with a small medical bag in her hand, calm, professional, like this was routine. Like people showing up like me was something that happened more often than it should. She glanced at me once, quick, assessing, then looked to him for direction, and he gave it with a single nod. "Take care of her," he said, stepping back just enough to shift the space. Not leaving, just repositioning, still watching, always watching, and I stood there for a second, caught between refusing and giving in, between holding on to control and accepting that I had already lost more of it than I wanted to admit. And when the woman stepped closer, her voice gentle, steady, asking me to sit again, I hesitated, just for a moment, before lowering myself back down, because deep down, beneath the fear and the resistance, there was something else I could not ignore anymore. Something quieter, but just as real. I needed help, and whether I trusted him or not, whether I wanted this or not, he had already decided that I was not walking out of here alone. She moved carefully, like she had done this 1,000 times, like nothing about me surprised her, and somehow that made it easier to sit still, easier to let my guard drop just enough for her to do her job, even as every instinct in me stayed alert. Tracking every movement, every sound, every shift in the room, her hands steady as she gently pulled the fabric away from my side, and I sucked in a breath before I could stop myself, not because of the pain, but because of how exposed it felt. Like every layer I had tried to hold together was being peeled back under bright light and quiet observation. "You are going to be okay," she said softly, her voice calm in a way that felt practiced, not false, just controlled, and I nodded even though I was not sure if I believed her. Not because of what she was doing, but because of where I was, because of him, still standing nearby, not interfering, not speaking, but present in a way that made it impossible to forget that this was not just a simple moment of care. This was something else layered underneath, something heavier. She worked in silence for a few minutes, cleaning, checking, wrapping, each movement precise and efficient, and I focused on that, on the rhythm of it, on the way her hands moved with purpose. Because it gave me something steady to hold on to, something that made sense in a night that had not made sense from the moment it began. "Nothing serious," she said finally, stepping back slightly. "You were lucky." Lucky, the word echoed in my mind in a way that felt wrong, like it did not belong to me, not tonight, not in this place, but I did not argue. Because I did not have the energy for it, and because part of me understood what she meant. I was here, I was breathing. I had not collapsed somewhere outside where no one would have seen me, and maybe that counted for something, even if I did not know what yet. She gathered her things quietly, glancing once toward him as if waiting for confirmation, and he gave it with a small nod, nothing more, no words needed, and she left the same way she came, smooth, silent, leaving the room feeling larger and emptier without her presence, and suddenly it was just the two of us again. The quiet stretching back into place like it had never been interrupted. I shifted slightly on the couch, aware of the clean bandage now in place, aware of how different I felt compared to a few minutes ago. Not safe, not exactly, but steadier. More grounded, and that made everything else feel sharper, clearer, including him, still standing there, watching me like he was waiting for something, not impatient, not demanding, just certain that whatever came next would happen on his terms, not mine. "Thank you," I said. Finally, the words coming out before I could stop them, because despite everything, despite the unease, despite the control I could feel pressing in from all sides, the help had been real, the care had been real, and I could not ignore that. His expression did not change much, but something in his eyes shifted slightly, acknowledging the words without making a big thing out of them, like gratitude was expected but not necessary. "You are staying here tonight," he said, not asking, not offering. Just stating it like it had already been decided long before I walked through those doors, and the tension that had eased for a moment came rushing back, tightening in my chest. "I told you, I will leave," I replied, quieter now, but still holding on to that line like it mattered, like it was something I could still choose, and he stepped closer then, not threatening, not aggressive, just closing the distance enough to remind me how little space there really was between his decisions and my reality. "You can walk out," he said, his voice low, controlled, almost gentle in a way that made it more dangerous. But you will not make it far, and the way he said it was not a warning meant to scare me. It was a fact, simple and unshakable. And something inside me stilled at that, because I knew he was right, not just because of whatever had been chasing me, but because of how exposed I would be the moment I stepped back out into the night, and he knew it too. That was the part that unsettled me the most. Not that he had power, but that he understood exactly where I stood without me saying a word. So you decide, he added, stepping back again, giving me space that did not feel like freedom, out there or here. And for the first time since I walked in, it felt like I was being given a choice. But as I sat there, looking at him, feeling the weight of everything that had led me to this moment, I realized something I did not want to admit. It was not really a choice at all. The silence after his words lingered longer than it should have, stretching thin until it almost snapped, and I sat there, staring at the space between us like it might offer an answer if I looked hard enough. But it did not, because deep down I already knew what the answer was. I just did not want to say it out loud, did not want to admit that the moment I stepped through those glass doors, the world outside had shifted into something I could not outrun anymore. My fingers tightened against the edge of the couch, grounding myself in something solid, something real, and I exhaled slowly, steadying the storm still moving inside me. Just for tonight, I said finally. The words quiet but clear, and it felt like signing something I did not fully understand, something I could not take back once it was done. His gaze did not soften, did not sharpen, it simply held, like he had already known what I would say before I said it. And maybe he had. Maybe that was the part that unsettled me the most. Just for tonight, he repeated, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just acknowledging the terms I was trying to set, even if we both understood they did not mean much in his world. He turned then, moving toward the far side of the room with that same controlled ease, like every step had been planned before it happened, and I watched him without meaning to, because it was impossible not to, the way everything seemed to shift around him. Adjust to him, as if the room itself followed his lead. He picked up a phone from the table, speaking quietly, too low for me to catch the words, but I did not need to hear them to understand what was happening. Things were being arranged, decisions were being made, and I was part of that now whether I liked it or not. When he hung up, he glanced back at me briefly, just enough to remind me that I was still being observed, still being considered. You will stay in the guest room, he said. And it sounded less like an option and more like a placement, like he was organizing pieces on a board only he could see. I pushed myself up slowly, testing my balance, feeling the pull at my side but ignoring it because I needed to. Feel like I could still stand on my own, still move without permission, even if that feeling was thinner than it should have been. And tomorrow? I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out because I needed to know where this ended, needed something beyond the next few hours, something I could hold on to. He paused for a fraction of a second, not long. Just enough to make me realize I had asked something he had not decided yet, or maybe something he had decided, but was choosing not to share. Tomorrow is not your concern tonight, he replied, and there it was again, that quiet control, that ability to shut down questions without raising his voice, without giving anything away, and I felt the frustration rise, sharp and sudden, because I was tired of not knowing, tired of being moved from one moment to the next without any sense of direction. It is my concern, I said, holding his gaze even as my pulse picked up again, even as I felt that familiar edge of fear pressing in. It is my life, and for the first time since I met him, something changed, not in his posture, not in his voice, but in his eyes, something deeper. Something that looked almost like recognition, like he understood exactly what I meant, and that made it worse, because understanding did not mean he would change anything. Then you should have chosen a different door, he said quietly, not mocking, not cruel. Just honest in a way that cut deeper than anything louder could have, and the truth of it hit harder than I expected, because he was right. I had chosen this. Maybe not him, maybe not this exact moment, but I had chosen to step inside, to cross that line, and now I was here, in a place where choices did not work the same way anymore, where survival came first and everything else followed after, and as he moved toward the hallway, gesturing for me to follow, I hesitated for only a second before stepping forward, because whatever came next, whatever tomorrow looked like, one thing was already clear: I was not leaving tonight. And part of me was starting to realize that leaving might not be as simple as I kept telling myself it would be. The hallway felt quieter than the room we had just left, the kind of silence that pressed in from all sides, softened by thick carpet and dim lights that turned everything into shadows and gold, and I followed. A step behind him, not too close, not too far, matching his pace without meaning to, like my body had already started adjusting to his rhythm, and that realization unsettled me more than anything else, because it was happening without permission, without thought. Just instinct. He stopped in front of a door halfway down the hall and opened it without hesitation, stepping aside just enough for me to enter first. Not a gesture of politeness, more like placement, like he was directing where I belonged for now, and I hesitated at the threshold again, not because I expected something inside, but because every doorway tonight had changed something, shifted something I could not undo. And I was starting to understand that each step forward meant leaving something else behind. Even if I could not name it yet, the room inside was smaller than the main suite, but still too perfect, too clean, a bed untouched. A lamp casting soft light across neatly arranged furniture, no signs of life, no signs of chaos, nothing that reflected the way I felt standing there, soaked, tired, trying to hold myself together with pieces that did not quite fit anymore. "You will rest," he said from behind me, his voice steady, leaving no room for argument. And I turned slightly, meeting his gaze again, searching for something, anything that might tell me what he actually wanted, what this actually was, but all I found was the same calm control, the same unreadable certainty. "And you?" I asked before I could stop myself, the question slipping out quieter than I intended, not challenging, just needing to know where he stood in all of this. He did not answer right away, and that pause stretched just long enough to make me aware of it. Aware of him considering how much to say, how much to give. "I will be close," he replied finally, and it was not reassurance, not exactly, more like information, a fact delivered without emotion, and something in me reacted to that, something I could not quite explain, because part of me felt safer knowing he would be nearby, even if I did not trust him, even if I did not understand him, and that contradiction settled uncomfortably in my chest. "You should lock the door," I said. The words coming out automatically, like a habit I had learned long before tonight, long before this place, and for a second, something almost like amusement flickered in his expression, brief, gone before I could be sure it was real. "You can," he said, stepping back slightly, creating space between us, "but it will not change anything." And there it was again, that quiet truth wrapped in calm words, reminding me that locks meant less here than they did anywhere else, that control worked differently in his world, and I nodded anyway, because some habits were not about logic, they were about survival, about holding on to something familiar in a place where nothing else was. He watched me for another second, like he was memorizing something, or deciding something I was not part of, and then he turned, leaving the doorway without another word, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall until they disappeared completely, and for the first time since I walked into the hotel, I was alone, truly alone, the silence settling in around me like a weight, not heavy, but present, constant, and I stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind me with a soft click that echoed longer than it should have, my hand resting on the handle for a second longer, like I expected it to move on its own. Like I expected something to follow me in, but nothing did, not yet, and I leaned back against the door, closing my eyes briefly, letting out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, trying to piece together everything that had happened, everything that had changed in the span of what felt like minutes, but had to be longer, because nothing this heavy happened that fast, nothing this permanent. And as I pushed myself away from the door and moved further into the room, one thought stayed louder than the rest. I had found shelter tonight. But I had not escaped anything, not really. I had just stepped into a different kind of storm, one that did not chase, one that waited. I did lock the door, Even after what he said, even knowing it would not change anything, the soft click of the lock sliding into place felt small, almost meaningless, but it was something familiar, something mine. And I held on to that for a second longer than necessary before letting go, turning back into the room that did not feel like mine at all, the air still, untouched, like it had been waiting for someone who belonged here, not someone like me. I moved slowly, every step measured, like I was testing the ground beneath me, expecting it to shift, expecting something to break the illusion of calm that wrapped around everything in soft light and silence. The bed looked too perfect, untouched, like it belonged in a magazine instead of a place where real people slept, and I hesitated before sitting down, careful, like I might leave a mark just by being there, my body finally registering how tired I was, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than muscles, deeper than sleep, something that settled into bones and stayed there. But even as I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, head in my hands, my mind would not stop moving, replaying everything, the rain, the street, the moment I pushed through those doors, the way his voice had cut through everything else, calm, certain, like nothing surprised him, like I was just another situation to handle, and maybe I was nothing more than that to him, just a problem that walked in on its own. But then I remembered the way he had looked at me, not dismissive, not indifferent, something else. Something that made me feel seen in a way I was not used to, and that unsettled me more than anything else, because being seen meant being known, and being known meant being vulnerable, and I could not afford that, not here, not with him. I stood up suddenly, pacing. Once across the room, then back again, the quiet amplifying every thought, every doubt, until it felt too loud to stay still, and I stopped near the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see outside, the city still alive, lights stretching into the distance, cars moving like nothing had changed, like the world was still turning the same way it always had, and for a second I pressed my hand against the glass, grounding myself in something real, something outside of this controlled space, but even that felt distant, like I was already separated from it by more than just a few stories of height. A soft sound in the hallway made me freeze, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, listening, waiting, the footsteps passing by, fading, and I exhaled slowly, tension easing just a fraction, but not fully, not completely, because I knew now that this place was not empty, not really, it was watched, controlled, every movement accounted for even if I could not see how. I let the curtain fall back into place and turned away, the room closing in again, softer now, quieter, but still not mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, letting the silence settle, and for the first time since everything began, I allowed myself to think about what came next, not tomorrow, not the future he refused to explain, just the immediate reality. I was here, in his world, under his decision, and whether I liked it or not, whether I trusted it or not, I had accepted something tonight. Something I could not undo. I lay back slowly, not fully relaxed, not fully at ease, just still, staring up at the ceiling as the weight of it all settled in, and one thought stayed clear above everything else. I had walked in to survive the night, but I was starting to understand that surviving might come with a cost I had not agreed to, not out loud, but in every step I had taken since I crossed that door. I did not realize when I fell asleep, only that the darkness came quietly, without permission, pulling me under in pieces instead of all at once, my body finally giving in after holding itself together for too long, and for a while there was nothing. No thoughts, no fear, just silence, until something pulled me back, not a sound exactly, more like a shift, a change in the air that my instincts caught before my mind could understand, and my eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim light still glowing from the lamp across the room. Everything exactly where I had left it, untouched, controlled, but something felt different, something subtle but undeniable. I pushed myself up on my elbows, listening, the quiet deeper now, heavier, like the entire floor was holding its breath, and then I heard it, a faint murmur beyond the door, voices low, controlled, too distant to make out words, but close enough to remind me that I was not alone here, not really. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, moving carefully, every step deliberate as I crossed the room, drawn toward the door despite myself, my hand hovering over the handle, hesitating for a second before I leaned closer instead, pressing my ear just enough to catch fragments. Already checked, a voice said, not his, sharper, more alert. No movement since she came in, another replied, quieter, steady, and my chest tightened at the words, not because of what they meant, but because of how easily I understood them. They were talking about me, tracking me, watching me, confirming my presence like I was part of something structured, something organized, and I stepped back instinctively, my pulse picking up again, the fragile sense of safety I had started to feel cracking under the weight of that realization. This was not just a hotel, not just a place where people came and went without notice. This was controlled, monitored, every detail accounted for, including me. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady myself, trying to think clearly, but the more I thought, the more everything connected in ways I did not like. The men in the hallway earlier, the way doors opened before he touched them, the way no one questioned his decisions, the way he had looked at me like he already knew how this would end. And a chill moved through me that had nothing to do with the cold outside. I was not just hiding here. I had stepped into something much bigger than I understood, and I did not know the rules, did not know the boundaries, only that they existed and I was already inside them. I turned away from the door, pacing once across the room, then stopping in the center, my thoughts moving faster now, sharper, more focused, because fear did that. It stripped everything down to what mattered, and what mattered right now was simple. I needed to leave. Not tomorrow, not later, now, before I got pulled any deeper into whatever this was, before his decisions became something I could not step away from. I grabbed the edge of the dresser, steadying myself as the room tilted slightly, my body reminding me that I was not fully recovered, that I was still running on exhaustion and adrenaline, but I pushed that aside, because staying was not an option, not anymore. I moved toward the door again, slower this time, quieter, my hand reaching for the lock. Turning it carefully, the soft click sounding louder than it should, and I froze for a second, listening, waiting for footsteps, for voices to change, but nothing did. The hallway remained the same, low voices, controlled movement, unaware or pretending to be. And I opened the door just enough to look out, the hallway stretching empty in one direction, dim light casting long shadows along the floor, and for a moment, just a moment, it looked like a way out, like something I could still choose. But then I remembered his voice, calm, certain, the way he had said it without hesitation, you can walk out, but you will not make it far, and standing there, half inside, half outside, I understood something I had been trying to ignore all night. This was never about whether I could leave, it was about whether I would be allowed to, and as I stood in that doorway, caught between the room and the hall, one truth settled in deeper than anything else. I had not just found shelter here, I had stepped into a place that did not let people walk away easily, and I was already part of it whether I wanted to be or not.